Hello and welcome to this second part of our two-part series where we want to take a look at how we can create this clay pot that you can see on your screen right now. In the first part, that will be linked in the upper right-hand corner right now, we already modeled our pot, and in this second part today, we want to take a look at how we can create our material for this clay pot inside of Blender with the Octane render engine. Before we start with our material for our pot, I will just show you what the world setup is. It's just a simple HDRI environment. I will link a video on how to set up such an HDRI environment inside of Blender with the Octane render engine in the upper right hand corner. So now we can close down this window down here with our HDRI, and we can start creating our clay material for our clay pot. So in order to see the material, I will go into the rendered view of our 3D viewport, and we should be able to see our pot lit by our HDRI environment. I will toggle these two options up here so that we can see our object a bit better. I will also toggle the sidebar. And as you can see down here in the right corner of our viewport, you can follow along with my key inputs. I will pull this window to the side and I will zoom in so that we can see what we are doing to our clay pot. And inside of this right window that I pulled up, we want to make the node setup for our shader. So up here, I go into the shader editor, I make sure that it is set to object, and then we can select the object that we want to apply our material to. In my case, this cylinder object up here, which is our pot. And then we can click on this new icon up here, and Octane will automatically create a universal material for us, and we can see the effect of the universal material in the 3D viewport. Universal material is exactly what we want. So in here, we just want to change one thing for now, and this is the dielectric IOR, and we want to change it from 1.5 to 1.45. That's great, and now we can continue. So the first step that we want to make is to give color to our clay pot. We will do that through a gradient map. So we press Shift A and we search for a gradient map. Here it is. We take the texture out of the gradient map and we plug it into the albedo of our universal material. Now we need a few nodes in order to get a nicer effect for the color, and we need a noise texture for that. So Shift A again, and we search for noise texture. Then here it is, and we take the texture out of the noise texture and plug it into the input texture of our gradient map. We also want a UVW transform node for our noise texture, and we also want a projection node. The projection node for these noise textures is pretty important in order for them to work properly when you animate this object. So make sure that there is a projection node put into this noise texture. Okay, so we will change a few things inside of this noise texture node first. And this is the octaves. We want to put them up to 16. And I also want this omega to 1. As you can see, we now have a really smooth noise texture on our object. And I also want to change this noise type from Perlin to Voronoi. The effect has changed a bit and it looks much rougher, much more in a direction of clay. Now we can continue, and we will continue with the gradient map. And inside of this gradient map, we want to change the colors of our pot. In my case, I want my clay pot to be a vibrant orange. So we will change these two colors. The left one to a darker orange. Maybe not that dark. Of course, you can change these colors to whatever you like. And the other one to a lighter orange. not that light, but around that is actually quite fine for me. And this is it for the main color. I also want to get a bit of color variation on my pot, and for that I will use another gradient map setup, basically the exact same that we have right here. So I select the whole tree, and now I press Ctrl C and Ctrl V to copy this tree. We also want to connect these two gradient maps with a mix texture. So we press Shift A again and we search for a mix texture. Then here's this node. And now I can drag this in between these two. And we don't want this first gradient map to be plugged into the amount, but we want it to be plugged into the first texture of this mix texture node. We can take the gradient map that we have done here, the copied one basically, and we plug this one into the second texture of our mix texture. Now I put the amount to 1 so that we can see the second gradient map down here. And in here we want to change a few things. First of all, the color scheme. We want this to be a dark brown basically. And I will go back here like this. This looks fine. And then here we want a light brown like this. This looks fine. And we also want to change a few things inside of this noise texture. And first of all, I want this to be a circular noise type. And then we take the contrast and we put it up to 2. Okay, this should be it for this second gradient map down here. If I put this to 0.5 again, or if I put the mix texture to 0.5, you can see that currently it is mixing these two different colors by 50%. So we basically get an in-between between these two colors or color schemes. We don't want that. What I want is a transition between a dark, basically dirt part of the texture down here at the bottom of our pot. And then I want this orange vibrant part to be another clean part of our pod up here. So we have to change the transition that we currently have between these two colors, and we will do that through another node setup. This will get a bit more complicated, but I think if you follow along, this will be fine. So first of all, I want to set up another node, in this case a gradient node. So we press Shift A again and we search for a gradient map. And we take the texture out and we plug it into the mix texture down here. We can leave this gradient map for now. We will come back to it later. Now I want another mix texture, so we press Shift A again and we search for a mix texture. We can take the texture out of the mix texture and we plug it into the input texture of our gradient map. Just like that. And now we will continue. First of all, we want another gradient map. So Shift A again and we search for gradient map, and this time we take the gradient map texture out and we plug it into the first texture connector of this mix texture node. And in here we want to change a few things. But before we do that, I want to add in another node, this time a syn wave node. The syn wave texture is what we are looking for. And we take the texture out of this syn wave texture and we plug it into the input texture of this gradient map up here. And now we can see a few things happening inside of our rendered viewport. We can see that the darker gradient map that is down here is affecting this front part here. Then it is transitioning to our orange gradient map. And then it is transitioning again to the darker gradient map. We want this, but we want it vertically, not horizontal like it is right now. And we also only want one transition, not multiple. So we will change that by clicking on this little plus inside of our Cinewave texture. And we want to create this UVW transformation node. Inside of this 3D transformation node, we now go to the rotation. And in the third value, we want to insert 90 for 90 degrees. And now we can see that this transition has turned from horizontal to vertical. This is what we want, but we still have multiples. So I go into the first value of the scale and I will put it to 30. And now we can see that there is only one transition. It's not seen that, or it's not that visible, but we will see it later. And we can also change a few values down here. In my case, I think they don't have such a big effect, but I will put the transformation, the first value to 0.46 and the second one to minus 4.12. These values should be changed to your liking and especially to your object. We will see if this is even necessary. Okay, for now we can't see much change in our object right now. So we will continue by adding in the second input to this mixed texture over here. The second input will be a noise texture. So we press Shift A again and we search for noise texture over here. And we take the texture out of this noise texture and we plug it into the mixed texture over here. We again want a UVW transform node, and we also want a projection node, just like this. And now you can see that we have a new effect on our material. Now there are orange parts and there are darker parts. There is no transition from a dirty bottom to a clean top of our pot, and this is what we are changing in a second. We now have to change a few things in this noise texture. First of all, I want the octaves to be completely at 16, and I want to take the omega up to 0.67, then the contrast to 1. So nothing has changed basically. That's totally okay. We will now continue by going up to this up here, this gradient map. And when we change these colors around basically, almost, yeah, here it is. So we have to go all the way to the right side with the white, and the white has to be on the left side and the black on the right side for us to see this effect happening. But there's the transition that we want. And now we can control the height of the transition with these two values. So we can say basically it should go up here. And then with this second gradient map that is down here, we can basically say how harsh or how direct the transition should be. Need quite a bit of time in order to really get a hand of these gradient maps so that they do what you want them to do. Right around here should be sufficient for now. And around that, this looks quite nice. Of course, there's a lot one can do in order to further enhance this effect. But for now, this should be enough for me. And of course, we can also control the color. Like if I take this dark brown up a bit, we can see that there's much more nuance in there. I will leave it like that. This looks actually quite good. But we can see that our pod is looking much too clean and not rough enough. and we will change that now. So let's start by adding in some roughness. In order to do that, I will take this whole node tree that we have created and I will pull it up here so that we have a bit more space. First of all, I want to add in a noise texture again by pressing Shift A and searching for a noise texture, like that. Noise texture, and we take the texture out and plug it into the roughness. And then we add in a UVW transform and a projection node again. Now we start by going in here, and I think I will take the gamma to 1.5 like this, and the rest should be fine like it is. We have a nice transition between shiny parts and rough parts of our pot. That looks great. And now we can continue because we still want a much rougher, or we want some surface imperfections basically. And for this we will use bumps. The bump map is basically a light displacement on the surface of our object, and we want to manipulate the surface of our object. So in order to get this, we will take a mix texture node again up here, and we take the texture out of this one and plug it into the bump of the universal material. And now we will, for one, take one noise texture, and we take the texture out and put it into the first texture connector of this mix texture node. And then I want to add a UVW transformation node and a projection node. And that's important now because I want little, how do you call them, grooves inside or on the surface of this pot that is typical for this clay look of a pot. And for this to achieve, I will take this 3D transformation node, and I will take the gamma inside of our noise texture to 2, and I think I can put the omega to 0 for now, and the octaves to 1 as well, and the contrast to 1 maybe, like this. And now we can go into the rotation. I will set this one to 90, and I want the scale to 100 in the first value, then 0.6 in the second, and 0.3 in the third. And now I will zoom in a bit, and we can see the effect because I have to pull this one to the left. But as you can see, the grooves are pretty slight and there's not much of this effect. And if I take the transform out and plug it into this X, Y, Z to UVW projection into the back, then we can start to see these effects quite nicely. So this is really important. Take this transformation node and plug it into the projection as well. And now we see these grooves. That looks pretty nice, but we are still not at the end with our journey because I want some imperfections that look like some clay broke out of the surface of our object. And we achieve that through another node setup that we plug into the second texture connector of this mix texture node. And this will be another noise texture. So Shift A again, and we search for a noise texture again. That here, we take the texture out and we plug it into the second texture of this mix texture node. And then we also want to add a UVW transform node And for now, I won't do a projection. We can add that in a second. And this one I want to be at power 8. And I want to set the type to turbulence, the octaves to 10. The omega can stay as it is. And we pull the contrast to 8 as well. Just like that, I want the scale to be 2 for all 3 values. And now we have to go back to the amount and we have to set it to 0.5 again. And now we should be able to see the effect of our second noise texture. If I go a bit to the right, we can see these, I hope it's visible on YouTube, we can see these little dents and these imperfections that we have on the surface of our material. And that basically concludes it for this texture. It was quite complex. I think this part up here, the transition between this dark part down here and this light part up here is a bit fiddly, but I think with enough time and patience, this effect is quite nice. Of course, now there's quite a hard transition, especially in color. If I change that up a bit, we can of course get a bit closer to the color that we wanted. Like this, maybe a darker brown is a bit nicer than the almost black that we had. But yeah, this looks pretty nice, and I think that this pod turned out quite nice. If you liked this video tutorial series, please leave a like and subscribe, and I see you next time inside of Blender with the Octane render engine.